to ask you about Toad's first album, Bread Circus. I mean, you guys were also young, but also seemingly fairly experienced musicians at that time. What do you remember the most about the creation of that album?
Well, Bread Circus, we were a new band. And I think the thing about learning how to play together is you end up developing styles that are, your own, meaning um, we were, it's like attention, you learn to lean on each other's strengths and weaknesses, right? And so we were all working it out as a unit. So we sound like a band because we had no idea what we were doing. And but we did that together. I mean, and a cooler example of that would be like the Pixies, where I think they just heard Strange Time Signature. Like they didn't know what they were doing at the beginning. And they really learned by the time of Bossa Nova. You can tell it's like they're not just like, winging it. And maybe they knew more than I thought they did. But and I think we had a similar thing. So we weren't really good, but we were a band. Dean, of any of us, the bass player, is the most educated musician. He actually can, sit at a piano and play any.
Yeah, he started at piano. He's self-taught bass, correct?
Yeah, but he's also a musical family. So it's like, I think for him, really in the blood, the lineage, and grew up with piano lessons. He learned, he learned more properly than any of us. But we've been playing around town, and I think part of the thing with us is where most bands would have to learn a ton of covers. We actually, on occasion, we'd have a show where it was a party or something, and we go like, oh man, we need to learn party songs. We need to learn the songs that people know. Because the main place we played in town is this place called Pat's Grass Shack. And Jerry, who ran the place, basically didn't believe in ASCAP or BMI, like who are the performance rights associations, right? So anytime you play in a club, if you play a cover,
yeah,
they're supposed to be paying money to the licensing organizations that pay for that song. This guy didn't believe in that. And so it wasn't that he was like an advocate for original local music. It was just that he was cheap.
Oh, no.
And so you had to play all originals. If you started playing Happy Birthday, he would literally like pull the plug on the stage. And so we started playing there. And so we had to have a full set of original material. And then we kept writing because you didn't want to play the same songs every week. And so that place turned us into writers. And turned us into an originals band. And so we were writing ferociously. We had to write in a way that most young bands don't. Like most young bands are fitting in their cover songs, and we were all originals. And so he did us a great service by that. And so, I mean, we were writing, and then basically there was a guy in a local band, Brad Knack, and he wanted a backup band for a couple songs, and he'd heard us playing, and he's like, hey, if you record 2 songs of mine, then you can record 2 of yours. And we're like, great. So we did 2 songs of his, we recorded 2 of our own, and we just did them live in the studio. And we were like, that's easy. Hey, if we do 8 more, it's a record. And so we did 8 more. So our first album was like, I think it was 48 hours to record and mix, and it was $600. And so Bread Circus was just, wow. It was like super quick, super easy. We just recorded it live. I think the only overdubs were like a saxophone and harmony vocals, and everything else was just played live.
So coming off the back of that record that you guys self-funded for the $600, is it true the band was then offered like $1 million back then by MGM to sign for them? And if so, how did you then kids muster the discipline to turn that down? Because back in that day,
yeah,
that's even more than what that would be now.
Well, I think it was MCA. And I forget if it was $1 million or $500,000. It might have been $1 million. I mean, once the bidding wars started, it got there. But we'd recorded 2 records. So right when we got signed, we were finishing up a second record, which cost a whopping $6,000 to do. And we did the same way. We just went in and recorded it live, and live lead vocals, which is why they're so horrifically out of tune. And so, we just, went in and did it live again. And I think there were somewhere between 8 and 12 seriously interested labels. And it's part of the thing is like, it's once one is interested, if it's the right person at that label, then they're all interested. And we were young, we were in Santa Barbara, so it was easy for people to drive from Los Angeles and have a night at the Biltmore. And that was back in the days when they all had their expense accounts and we're happy to use them. So, the Biltmore probably honestly got us a lot, probably is as anything as in us getting a record deal.
And you're talking about the second. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I want to hear the rest.
Well, the second record, we finished both. And while we were close to finishing, Nick Terzo, the guy at ASCAP, we had a guy named Marvin Etzioni produced the second album. Marvin's manager was Ron Sabule, who worked at ASCAP. Nick was like 21 or something, and he was working at ASCAP. Ron gave him a copy of our first record. He sent him out. So it was like, just as we were finishing the second album, it came out. And we were young, and we had, we weren't like a punk rock band, but we had a punk rock ethos. And our attitude was that we didn't really need a record company. We didn't want to have hits. I was about to go off to college. Like, we got signed. I was supposed to be going to San Francisco State and go off and we were all going to go to different towns. I think Todd really wanted the band to stay together and do it. And the rest of us just figured, that's the thing we did. And even getting signed, I think the attitude was like, we'll get signed. We'll be there 2 years. They'll drop us. Everyone gets dropped. And, it's like, but it'll be a fun story. And so our manager, Chris Blake, I think was also really protecting us. And there were, Geffen was talking to us and they were like, great, take the best songs from these first two albums. We'll re-record them at a real studio, make a real record. And we're like, nope, those are real records. We want to do those, and we're already working on songs for the third record, and we want to put these out, tour colleges. We weren't in it for the money. And, part of that is I think a punk rock ethos, and is also probably coming from Santa Barbara and feeling like, we were going to be okay, right? It's that middle class comfort where you're going to, you'll be able to get a job, get a college education. It's like, it wasn't like, I think there's a fire that happens when you have to make it through music or you have to make it through sports. Like, you look at, hip hop and R&B and like country music and bluegrass. And, if you came from poverty, and you came from nothing, you had to fight and you had to be the best. And, and like people from that background, I think there's like a need to make it work. And my thought was like, I already knew at 15 that I didn't want to sell myself. I didn't want to be famous. I didn't need to be famous. I wanted to be a teacher, wanted to get a pension. I wanted to not hustle. I wanted to not compete. I wanted to not be held up for constant public scrutiny. And so it was more, it afforded us this attitude. And to a degree, that attitude kept us with this indie attitude within the record company. When we signed with Columbia, we took, our advance for the Fear album was probably 1/10 of what MCA was offering us. And we took a little licensing fee for the first two albums, but we had this attitude. It's like, if we take your money, then we got to do what you say. And so we're not going to take your money. We're going to earn what we make if we make anything. And we're going to make the best records we possibly can. And we don't care if we have a hit. I mean, we were listening to, Dinosaur Jr. and Dump Truck and Squirrel Bait and Husker Du and The Replacements. And we didn't get,
whoops.
Like the bands we loved were not trying to have hits. And the irony of Toad's career is that when we had a hit, we became a punchline for jokes about how the majors were destroying indie music, right? And we were one of the first bands to kind of cross that threshold when right at that time in in the early 90s when, radio was deregulated, when the formats were all over the place, where indie music was starting to cross over and make it big. And, once again, we just had this attitude that at the one hand, I think helped us and saved us. On the other hand, the disease of bands in the 90s was to be on major labels and act like you weren't on an indie label. So you think of bands like Counting Crows or Pearl Jam, who refused to sing their singles live or would disfigure their singles so they were unrecognizable live, right? Thinking of Adam and how, Mr. Jones and me, he would never sing the melody, and Pearl Jam wouldn't sing alive, right? And so we were all on major labels, but we were all acting like we were too cool for school and we didn't want any success. And so there was a lot of self-sabotage in that. And I think if a band wasn't also really crystal clear on who they were, what their image was, and I think we thought REM didn't have an image, because it just felt like, no, we roll out of bed, we look this way, we're just cool, call it. And we're like, we can do the same, but we just were schlubs. And, they were art forward as people, I think. And we were nerds. And so if you don't pay attention to those things and think they might be important, then people fill in the gaps for you, and they don't ever do it flatteringly.
People talk about the band's maturing sound then between Bread and Circus and the next album, Pale. That was really because you actually already had Pale done, but then you went back in and re-recorded it? Or was there a certain amount of maturity that changed in between the albums?
Nothing changed. Our entire thing, we didn't have artwork for it, but it was mixed. So our whole thing, those two records, they were just recorded. One was in a track tome, one was in a big open room, so it sounds airier. I mean, the big change was when we went in and we did Fear. We wanted to make a big album. I was in love, as much as I like the indie kind of post-punk bands, I also loved Cocteau Twins, Peter Gabriel, Talk, Tears for Fears, Thomas Dolby. I loved big productions and these, expansive records. And so when we went in and were doing Fear, even the producer we worked with, Gavin McKillop had produced bands like Shriek Back and The Church and The Chills. And, I was a huge XTC fan, and, and I know Skylarking is more of a Todd Rundgren album than an XTC album in a certain way. But it's, they made such brilliant records. And I grew up, my brother, he works for Korg USA. He designs synthesizers, and he's, and so I grew up with all his influences as well. And, we love, Trevor Horn Productions, the Yes albums, and the Buggles, and, it's so we wanted to make a big record that was like Songs from the Big Chair or something, and so Fear was the big departure, where, it was 48 tracks back when it was like 2 reel-to-reels and, a giant SSL console, and, we threw in every idea we could think of, and it was an amazing experience to make